Hey everyone, and welcome back to Citywide Blackout, your home for the best creators from around the world. I'm your host, Max Bowen, and joining me now, this is going to be a lot of fun, guys. I know we're kind of out of Halloween, the season's come to a close, but we're still going to talk some horror. I am talking with author Michael Harris Cohen for his many works, but most recently, his recently released collection of short horror stories, Effects Vary. Michael, welcome to the show. This is going to be a lot of fun, man.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Thanks very much for having me on, Max.
Of
Appreciate it.
course, of course. All right. So let's dive into Effects Vary because just reading everything about it, I mean, there's so much here. You've got 22 stories, 20 of which
hmm
have been previously published in places, in all sorts of places, really. I want to ask first, though, about the decision to collect all these together into one book. What led to this?
I think it's just a matter of accumulation. At some point, I gathered up so many stories over the years. I think maybe 2, 3 years ago, I felt like, it's probably a collection. And then I had the experience of sending it out to a few places and getting some really nice personal rejections, which are lovely. But to be honest, in some ways, the personal rejections almost hurt more. To know that it's better than a form rejection, of which I've had plenty. But it's knowing that you're kind of close. And there was actually an editor who said the stories are great, but in some ways it doesn't quite feel like it's a complete collection. So then I think what happened is I reached a point where I needed just a few more stories to kind of round it out. And it's not even just a matter of number of stories, but it's a kind of a total feel in some ways. And it's a real intuition thing, in terms of ordering and putting it together. But it felt like it was complete and ready to go out in the world, and then it finally got accepted.
I wouldn't think too much on the order of it, but how do you decide? Because, like, for me, I would probably just like, oh, just put them all together. That's fine. But how do you decide, like, the order for it?
I mean, this was new to me. I'd had a book, it'd been a while. I mean, I consider myself in some ways a kind of a late bloomer, and I'm definitely I'm a slow writer. Though I've put out a lot of stories, not beyond what's in this collection in the last decade. But I didn't think about it so much last time because in the first book it was a novella, and then they actually decided to publish it and asked for a few more stories, so that was easy. Uh, this time it was a real gut thing. I mean, I think in some ways what's interesting is I think my analogy recalling the process was listening to something that I heard comedians talk about. In terms of how they build a set, and I think maybe it was even Louis C.K. I don't know, maybe he's still a controversial figure, but I'm a fan. And he said when he's developing a comic set, he figures out his kind of best piece, which is his opener, and then he moves it towards the end. And so then he has to have another strong piece to start. So I thought, okay, I have to have a really strong opening piece that kind of sets the tone for the book, uh, and then obviously a strong closer too. Um, there's it's 22 stories, but I would say maybe about a little more than a third are flash fiction. So I also wanted to have this kind of balance between long and short. So I wanted people, if they're reading kind of a longer story, maybe the flash piece is in some ways almost like a palate cleanser, and then I put a few of those together.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
for me, it was a bit of a no-brainer too in terms of thinking of which one comes towards the end, because there's the longest piece in the collection is called The Court Painter, and it's not a novella, but I think it's probably about, must be the longest, about 9,000 words, something like that. And I knew that that was also tonally still dark, but almost with a little bit more a little bit more hope in some ways. So, but yeah, it felt complete. And I think I'm a big fan of Brian Evanson, and he had also I had read something somewhere, him talking about a collection, and kind of looking for that, trying to put yourself in the reader's head and thinking about their journey through the book.
Did you go through a number of different like orders though?
I did, man. I did. I got to tell you. I mean, it's interesting. One of the things about writing, because I've been a teacher of writing for several decades, and one of the things I say to students about writing is that writing is this constant series of choices, and it's not necessarily the perfect choice, but in a story, but often finding kind of what the best choice is. Especially in revision, and so I went through probably 4 or 5 iterations. So I would put it in a kind of an order and then leave it alone. and then go back and think about it based on the table of contents and whatnot. So I'm happy with this though, how it came out. I mean, I haven't heard, issues where somebody felt like it was out of order, but I don't think most people realize, how much writers drive themselves crazy with, every stage of the writing process.
There is so much anxiety and self-doubt. I hear it all the time. Like, oh my God, I'm awful. This is terrible. No one's ever going to read it. I've wasted my life. It varies.
Oh man, I mean, actually, it's funny. Literally in the last class I taught this week, because I have this advanced fiction workshop, and so most of the writers are slightly higher caliber. There's some real superstars there, and I did a kind of a Venn diagram on the board, probably some meme I'd seen somewhere that basically it was very simple, two circles intersecting, and on one side you have creativity, on the other side you have self doubt. And this is the space in the center is where art happens. I mean, at least for me and the majority of the artists that I know in any medium, it's never something that disappears. But you just kind of learn to push past it. Honestly, I think it's better. I mean, I think if you're writing from a place of kind of pure ego and a sort of a cocky self-confidence, I mean, I doubt the work's going to be very good.
And I can't see many writers being too egotistical because I think they all start from the same place where they publish their first book and they probably still have boxes of it in their attic.
Yeah, absolutely. I think probably most writers are in that situation. I mean, I think the more people write, and a writer like a Stephen King or a Laird Barron or something. I think maybe for them they just have the more kind of the discipline, the workmanlike attitude.
Yeah.
So maybe that doesn't even enter into it. Just knowing they have to kind of throw the clay down, it's going to be a bit misshapen, but you can always rework it into something else. And the more the thing is, the more you go to the well, as these people who can write full time for a living, you realize the more the well actually refills.
Yeah,
So it
exactly.
never runs out.
Plus, taste is so subjective. I mean, if you ask 10 people what's the best movie, you're likely going to get 10 different answers. So you can't take it too hard or too personally when someone doesn't give you a great review on Amazon or your books don't sell too well because taste is just a weird thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm still waiting for my first bad review of this book. So far, yeah, people are really digging it, but we'll see. Maybe it hasn't reached a wide enough audience. So I mean, my mother's a little iffy on some of it, but she's been saying for years she appreciates my writing, she loves it, but when I started moving more into genre, she said, "Well, you're such a good writer, but I really wish you wrote different things." So it's a little. Yeah,
Oh,
she has a
moms.
hard time with some of the content. Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
moms are.
moms.
It's like, oh, why can't you write something nicer or more uplifting? It's like, nope, murder, doing
Yeah,
murder.
it's true. She's not a big fan of the genre, although my book is actually dedicated to her because the my formative years, I mean, were those I grew up in a family of bibliophiles, and those formative years were trips to the library. And that was, obviously, I mean, I'm a bit older, I'm 56. This is pre-internet. So books were the thing. People in my family talked about authors the way probably other families do about sports heroes. So going to the library, and that was my dedication for her, letting me take home all the books I could carry, and that sort of laid the groundwork, I guess.
Yeah, my summers, while everyone else was going to the beach, I was going to the library.
Man, still such a magical place.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
yeah, I think if I hadn't been a teacher and a writer, I think I might have been a librarian and a writer.
Yeah.
It just seems like such a amazing chill job. Maybe it's not. I mean, I don't really know what it's like on the inside. It's got to have its downsides, but it seems like being surrounded by books all day, uh, having people come in who love books. And I had a fantasy for a few years of running a small one of those kind of boutique used bookstores, right? Because obviously these are places we love. And there was a place I used to frequent, a used bookstore, and the guy said, I told him my fantasy, and he said, "Man, I think you better choose a different fantasy because we're dying." This was 25 years ago,
Oh,
so
geez, yeah.
it's
It's weird though. I think it would actually do better now because everything is becoming so retro. Like you're seeing like records return, of course. Bands are making tapes of all things.
I think so, and I really hope so. I mean, and that's the thing is that our generation. I mean, you're a bit younger than me, but you still obviously have a, based on what you're surrounded with, the beautiful posters and the books. And we had an appreciation for kind of the materiality of things, whether it was records or even CDs and of course books.
Hmm.
But that's, yeah, I think you're right. I think it's making a comeback, and we'll see. It's beautiful to see the way the LP has made a comeback.
Oh yeah, definitely. Actually, like my sort of like side dream is to start my own coffee shop, and there would be just like tons of books on the walls, on shelves, and you have a very like chill, kind of like jazzy feel to it. But
Yeah,
I
yeah,
also know that the restaurant
yeah.
industry is a very tough thing to break into. I don't have a lot of capital to start it up, so
Yeah, the same. No, I get it. I get it. I have that dream, but then I have a few friends in the kind of restaurant, coffee shop business, and you realize the reality of it is, yeah,
it's like
it's an absolute labor of love. I mean, I don't really want to work 80 hours a week just to try and keep something going.
yeah,
So,
that's definitely not. I want to ask about being a writing teacher. Do you ever have students who, like they had their dream of being like a novelist themselves?
there's a few. I mean, it's interesting because, I mean, without kind of explaining the whole thing, but my teaching situation is well, I don't know how unique it is, but it's, I mean, they're undergraduates. It's an undergraduate program, and when I came in right after doing a Fulbright here in Bulgaria, and we had another kid, and I thought, well, shit, how am I going to make a living? And I really lucked into this job. I mean, it's a great university. It had been around already for, oh, I think about 10 years, and basically there was no kind of creative writing teacher or program, so I started this right from the beginning. And these students, it's a liberal arts education, which means they come in, and the majority of them are business majors. They're very pragmatic, a lot of journalism majors and so on, but they have to take courses in a wide variety of fields. I mean, this is the liberal arts model, right? That ideally you kind of have this salad bar of all these different disciplines, and it makes you a more well-rounded human being. And I'm a believer in it. I really am. So the students were, from the get-go, super excited about this course. I mean, for so many of them, it was, you know, they many of them had never had the opportunity to kind of, be exposed to this sort of literature and tell their own stories. Um, and then there's the few. There's always the few who were phenomenal and still are, and these are the readers. And some of these, they get so excited about the course that after writing a couple stories, they come to me and they say, "Hey, I have an idea for a novel," and like, well, that's great, run with it, but writing a novel is it's a long walk through the wilderness. So see. But some have written some longer works. A couple have went on to MFA programs. But I mean, but most of them are very pragmatic. They, like I said, they come through this, and I hope they keep writing. I encourage them at the end of the course. I said, if you get that idea in the middle of the night, write it down. But we'll see. I have a few now too who are just amazing. I mean, so much more talent than I had at that age. I think part of it is the language thing too. Most of my students speak, minimum three languages. So, and you've got students who are, oh, I don't know, when they come into college, some of them, 17, 18, and you ask them their favorite book, and they say, Lolita or Bulgakov's Master and Margarita. And I mean, they're reading, some of them are reading really serious literature at an early age.
Do you ever give them like practical advice about just navigating the publishing industry?
This is something I'm only starting to do now, because in the intro class, it's really not an issue so much. I mean, I run a literary magazine, the Fly in the Head, which is based on a Bulgarian expression, muhavu v glavata, fly in the head. And essentially what this means is, it's a great idiom. It means you have this idea like a fly in your brain that won't leave you alone. So started that years ago, and for now, the intro students, when a really great story would come out, I'd say, hey, you want to publish in this magazine, and they're always eager. But now in this advanced class, and this is now we have a creative writing minor. This is the first time I've taught this. That's a unit we're leading towards. So I'm going to break them into the reality of it. Part of their final project is to actually submit a story to a market. So I said, this will be good for you. You'll likely gear up for rejection, which is, it's time to start building some of those calluses on your soul. but yeah, I'm going to introduce them to a submission grinder and, talk about, queries and how one chooses a market and this kind of thing. I mean, it's obviously something I know a great deal about. So it'd be very, very interesting to pass it on. Um,
I think when it comes to the like rejection calluses, you want to just like rack those things up as early as possible because eventually you're gonna get to a point you just could not give a fuck. You're gonna get the rejection, like be like
yeah,
whatever, put it in the wall, throw it in the trash, whatever. But just rack it up, man, rack it up.
this is it. This is it, man. And I mean, I'm old enough to have accrued those early rejections on actual paper. The kind of sending out the self-addressed envelopes. Getting back the kind of the little note card. You get the envelope in and you feel it, and you're like, it's not a
Yeah.
contract. So although I will say, and this for better or worse encouraged me, the very first story I sent out, which I eventually published later. And I thought, well, let's send it to the New Yorker. I never sent them another story since then. I didn't realize what a big deal this was. I got a small post-it note, handwritten, which said, interesting voice, but I don't think it's quite there yet. So I thought, oh, okay. But again, being so clueless, I had no idea that a handwritten rejection from the New Yorker was a big deal. And they were right. The
Yeah,
story was not there. I
yeah.
had to rework it.
Frame that thing, frame it, put it on the
Yeah,
wall.
I should have. We've moved too many
Oh
times since
no.
then. Yeah, a lot of shit's been lost in the wind, I'm afraid.
I'm sure. I'm sure. You talked earlier about the more personal rejections. I'm curious about some of the if they've ever given you advice or like ideas that actually made you a better writer.
Oh, honestly, it's a rare thing. I mean, I think the most recent one I can think about, and it's for one of the stories which is in the book. It's a story which is called Book of Skies. It's one of the only two stories which had not been previously published, and it I mean, it has kind of an interesting sort of history as a story. Is that originally I was writing? I don't know if you know Joe Meinhardt. He's the one who runs Crystal Lake Publishing.
Oh yeah,
So amazing guy.
actually, I know Joe very well because we've had a number of their authors on the show. So yeah, he and I are we're almost besties.
He's just a amazing publisher and from what I know of him, just beautiful human being, very generous spirited. And he started maybe 2-3 years ago a contest for these short flash fiction called Shallow Waters, and I thought these were great because this, especially during the school year, I'm so busy I hardly have time to write, but I can bust out a flash fiction, 1,000 words. So I had actually a few of the books in the story were written for these kind of contests, and that was one. And I think it took second place, and for sure he was going to publish the first, and he wanted to publish that one as well. And I thought, I'm going to hold on to it because I feel like it could be more. And indeed, I expanded it, and I think I made it a better story. So I sent it to, at one point, what's it called? Weird Horror, I think. It's Michael Kelly with Undertow. Great editor, fantastic publisher. And he sent me a beautiful personal rejection, and said the story is really strong, and but I got a lot of submissions, it doesn't quite work. And I did something which is typical. That's a personal rejection. You'll rarely get a kind of explication of what's missing, and it's generally considered sort of bad form to write them back because they're so busy. And the last thing you want to do is irritate one of these potential future publishers. But I wrote him back and I said, hey, so I know you're busy, but if you have the time, I'm kind of curious, what do you think could be improved? And he had great advice. He said essentially that the ending is just too damn dark, man. I mean, it's basically, if you read the story, you realize they're fucked. Essentially, there's no way out. I mean, it's a kind of a cosmic horror story. It's a folk horror story, about this kind of lineage of the family of farmers who've had to read the signs of the sky. And all these different skies are archived in this kind of ancient book, which has been passed down from generation to generation. And there are sacrifices involved. And the ultimate sacrifice that they demand is a very high price to pay. So I don't want to spoil it. Maybe, somebody will, hopefully more people will read it. And he basically, said, give them the opportunity to at least to escape this, even if there's no chance. And I thought, you know what? You're right. And so that was an incredible bonus. But otherwise, I've never had it with personal rejections. I've only had it with editors who I've worked with, who I've been lucky enough to work with, who said this story is fantastic, but I think this, and this, to change.
I think that's very good advice about giving them a chance, because sometimes with books or movies, you can immediately peg, okay, she's gonna die, he's gonna die, she's gonna die, he might die, he's probably gonna make it. It becomes very, very easy, particularly if the writing isn't really strong. So I think it's good that if you can keep it that open.
I mean, honestly, it's a fundamental question, I think, that a horror writer is faced with when you're putting this protagonist through whatever their particularly awful labyrinth is will the character survive? Will they die? If they survive, are they haunted? Are they redeemed? This kind of thing. I mean, I think, I've written a lot of, more experimental and more kind of realistic fiction over the years too, and these are not necessarily questions that entered into it. I mean, actually, thinking about the students again, one of the things I tell them early when kind of introducing them to the idea workshop is I said, you students are homicidal maniacs, man. I mean, they just want to kill their characters. And I realized early on in the class, I know why. And the reason is because whether they've written stories or not, we all, like Joseph Campbell talks about and Carl Jung, we all kind of have this fundamental template of story. And we know in some way that the character has to change by the end. Something has to shift, but they don't know how to do it because endings are hard. I think it's for sure the hardest part of the story. So what did they do? They kill the character. So yeah, this is something I've definitely struggled with. But honestly, it's one of the things that I love about horror is you watch a horror movie, you read a good horror story or novel, you don't know. They might make it. They might wind up, in some level of hell, some absolutely horrific situation that's just going to leave this, echo, this residue when you finish the book, where you're kind of trembling. Though I love that feeling,
Mm.
honestly.
That, and I think, are your characters, or are they cannon fodder? Do they actually matter, or are they just there to be,
Yeah.
bodies stacked up for the villain?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, for me, that's the fundamental difference between good horror and just the crap. I mean, literary horror, and it's an amazing time for horror. I mean, I don't need to pay it much lip service. Everybody's talked about it. We're in a kind of a renaissance, right? Uh, but for me, the horror that I read and what I write, I mean, the characters have to be human beings. Horror only works if it has this emotional core in it. You have to care about the characters, and this is why a lot of the crappy horror movies. I mean, they might be kind of fun to watch for the splatter of the gore. You can have this kind of ironic detachment, but for me, if I don't care about the characters, I'm not invested. It's not going to hit me on that kind of deeper vibration. I mean, I'm thinking obviously like, I mean, film wise, the like Ari Aster, right? Hereditary and Midsummer. You care about these characters, even the ones in Midsummer that are kind of jerks. It's like you feel like Jesus, man, that's a horrible fate that you have to go through. Or recently, I don't know if you've seen this Danish one. It's absolutely fantastic. It's called Speak No Evil. Um, it's highly recommended. I cannot remember the name of the director, but it was one of the last films where the last 20 minutes, the ending just completely floored me. And a big part of that is because again, it's kind of a slow burn. They really settle into it at this pace that makes you care for the characters, and something's unsettling from the beginning, but you have no idea what it is, and by the end, yeah, it's a lot.
Oh, nice, nice. One thing you mentioned about the horror renaissance, I think especially too that we're seeing more of, and this is a good thing, is a lot more horror comics, especially from like indie writers, indie creators. Like what comes to mind immediately is a title I recently read called Sea of Sorrows, and it's all about mermaids. And wow, it's intense, and I loved it.
See, Sorrows. I saw you writing down my movie rec. I'm gonna have to write that one down
Yeah,
too.
it's
Excellent.
it's definitely
I,
worth checking
I,
out.
I mean, I'm a little bit out of touch with that for sure. I know I like the Alan Moore stuff. The what was the Jack the Ripper one? uh, which is fantastic. And Juno Ito, the is one of my favorites. So CSRs. All right.
Yeah, definitely worth
So
checking out. Yeah. Um,
sounds good.
let's talk about these stories now. Effects vary. 22 stories, and you've got some amazing things here. And I'm just gonna read off for everyone a couple of the stories you know what you're getting into. You've got aging TV stars' murderous plan to rekindle the old glory days. A father who returns home from war forever changed. Human lab rats who die again and again and again and again, and a farmer who obeys the commands of the sky. Damn, man, I'm sure you get this question a bunch, but where do the ideas come from?
Good question. I mean, this last one is the one I was talking about, the Book of Skies. You know, all kinds of different places. I would say a number of the stories were kind of triggered by anthology calls. This is something that really gets my juices flowing, and I think part of it, in all honesty, has to do with the deadlines because if you're a writer and you don't have a deadline, it can be hard. We're all natural born procrastinators. The only deadline basically is death, which I'm certain to meet, as are we all. But a number of them, like for example, this one with the aging film star. It's a story which is called Erasing Tony, and the impetus for that one was there was a call from it's kind of, I can't remember the publisher exactly. It's a sort of a writing collective or something. Very interesting group of people out of somewhere on the West Coast. I think San Francisco, and they had put out a few of these horror anthologies underneath the title Black Candies. So they had a call for 80s horror. And, there's this crazy obsession with the 80s. So many shows, set in this time, Stranger Things and so on. And that got my wheels spinning. And I think, as is often the case with these anthology calls, I will sit down and start a story, and often find it's kind of stillborn. It doesn't come to life. It's not usually. I'll reach a point where I'll know, what, this is not working. I'm kind of forcing it. And then I think, for that one, I just started thinking, wow, what happens to a lot of these 80s TV stars that have kind of fallen out of fashion, and yet they're in the public eye because they're on YouTube. And yeah, it became a very interesting, challenging story to write in that way, because it's a lot of cut up, and it's one of the few stories where I'm kind of jumping around, between these video clips. It has that sort of a weird format, formal thing where she's imagining an audience all the time, still in her head, and also thinking about trying to kidnap the son from the playground of her former co-star, and the former co-star was her son on the show. So she feels she's unbalanced. She feels like this is somebody she was close to. So at some point, I think with that story, I had to cut it up almost like a fortune cookie and reassemble it. And then, some of the short stories were inspired by those the Shallow Waters call. Joe Meinhardt, as I mentioned, he would have a particular theme, and that would get my juices flowing. The one about the characters these kind of clone-like figures who die over and over and over again. That was one that just came to me. Who knows where? And I think I had the opening page, and I knew it was good. But it's one of those things where sometimes you come up with an idea that's good. You're not sure where it's going. You love the opening line. You feel like that really is going to be the opening of the story, and you don't approach it, maybe because you're afraid of fucking it up in some ways. You just kind of leave it. And then I think it was a contest call for a magazine called Friction, which is pretty cool. I've had a couple stories with them because they illustrate all the stories. It feels like a graphic novel. It's a lot of fiction and some nonfiction and some poetry, but everything is illustrated. And they always have one big writer. They've had Ben Piercy, Joyce Carol Oates, Stephen Graham Jones has been published in there. So that was a contest, and Mercedes Yardley was judging it. And I thought, okay, this is the story, and I'm gonna, bust it out. And yeah, I ended up winning it. So that was, but yeah, where the ideas come from. I mean, honestly, I have no shortage of ideas. It's just, a matter of finitude and time. I don't have time to write all the ideas I have.
So you must have this like big notebook, just chock full of all these different ideas.
Man, I am drowning in notebooks and files of story ideas. And yeah, I almost wish I had a clone in some ways that I could, you know, chain in the living room and just make them write all the work. But of course, that always would end badly.
Oh, every
So
time. Yeah, I was gonna say that could be a story actually. The writer
yeah,
who clones himself so he can get more work done, but he chains the
it
clone in a room, have him write all day.
it never works. Yeah. You have to put the hours in. You have to do the work. So we'll see. We'll see when I get them all
It's
done.
like, Clone Michael, get to work, please. No, I'm
Yeah,
tired.
exactly.
Work, damn you.
Uh, yeah, for sure they're going to rebel. They're going to escape, take over my life, and then no, I'm not the clone. I'm the real Michael.
Exactly,
Yeah.
and then you die. That's how it always goes. Every single
hmm
time. Yeah, wait.
Yeah, exactly. That's why it's good that we ingest a lot of horror, so we learn what not to do. So what lines not to cross.
Yeah, every time I see any kind of advancement in robotics, I think, guys, stop. We know where this ends.
It's amazing. I mean, I have this kind of dual feeling towards the technology and the research. Part of me is fascinated and part of me is completely apocalyptic. Like, you're really edging towards the singularity. It's like, are we sure we want to do this?
I can recall reading one story, and it was about a robot that was able to more or less learn from previous experiences. I thought, guys, what the hell? Don't give it a gun,
Yep.
Jesus.
Yeah. Well, it's something that drives us, as humans. This pursuit of knowledge, for better or worse. We want to see things through to the end. I get it. If you're, some artificial intelligence programmer, genius guy, you want to take it as far as you can. But we'll see. I mean, it's so interesting, right? Because in some ways, you wonder, like, okay, how much of this is the sort of the jetpack and the flying car of our era? I mean, this is a lot of the William Gibson has this great story. I think it's called the Gernsback Continuum, and it has all this these kind of these echo images of this projected future that never happens, and it's all very familiar. These kind of cities you'd see in the old sci-fi covers, the jetpacks, the flying cars. I mean, this shit didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see. We all imagine what technology develops at a kind of an exponential rate that we're within 10 years people have serial ports in their head and so on, the Elon Musk chip. But I think it's usually it's somehow it defies our expectation. I mean, I don't think anybody could have sort of predicted what exactly the internet would be, or Twitter for that matter.
Ugh.
Whatever Twitter is now. I don't know.
Exactly. All right. Let's get back to talking about the stories. Now, I read
Sure.
that you deal with a lot of different themes, including love, loss, and family. Why these?
It's not something I consciously start out with. I think my usual starting point is character or situation. Something that kind of intrigues me, and it's in some ways this is more I mean, because this is a little bit what you're talking about is kind of the ad copy that I designed, because it's as an indie guy I don't have a publicist, but it's talking about looking at the collection as a whole and having that kind of distance to see it for what it is. One of the things that I realized is that every story, regardless of the topic, the theme, the setting, whether it's kind of cosmic horror, more folk horror, or if it has even like this one with the clones graduating, which has a kind of a sci-fi bent. It's really about family, you know. So it's obviously, I mean, to be honest, and I don't mean to be, kind of glib or cagey. I think it's one of those things that I haven't examined so much in the same way that I think for most writers, probably, at least from my perspective, I don't think going through intensive Freudian or Jungian or Lacanian psychoanalysis is necessarily beneficial for you as an artist, maybe as a human being, right? I mean, nobody said as an artist you're necessarily a happy person, though generally I am, but that's kind of where you work out your stuff. It seems to come up a lot. There's a lot of mother-child relationship. There's a lot of, actually, I didn't even realize it till a reviewer recently Love the book. At least that was my impression for the book. It was a very positive review, but she rated it a little bit lower. This kind of 7 out of 10, whatever her system was. And she said in the review, she said, well, people are probably wondering why I didn't give this a higher score, but the truth is there's a lot of child death, which is triggering. And of course, I mean, in horror, almost anything goes, but there are a few areas where, you know, publishers often discourage. I mean, and for obvious reasons, what sexual violence and rape, and those are not things I deal with in my work. But child death and an animal death. And I realized, shit, she's right, man. A lot of, there's a lot of kids who are put in harm's way, or so. I mean, not every story. So, but I guess this is sort of a trigger warning to the audience, whoever they may be, because I did an issue with one. I mean, and this is kind of a touchy subject too, but an interesting one, I think. I personally, I understand them. I'm not a fan of them. I mean, for me personally, I'm never going to read a trigger warning for a book because for me, it's a kind of a spoiler. I don't want to know those things, and I don't mind. Maybe I don't have so many triggers, but I like to push those buttons, and then it's interesting for me to see, you know, maybe think about after the fact why I felt this kind of discomfort and so on. I mean, that's what I come to horror for. One of the reasons. It's for me with short stories, it's really kind of story by story. But I will say, I mean, even this I'm working on a longer piece. I mean, it's again another probably my I've written 3 novels, but they're all trunked. Okay. They're all maybe, some of them I'll resurrect. And part of it is just because, I have no problem putting down the words and writing, one of them's 120,000 words. A lot of good writing, a lot of interesting ideas, but then I kind of move on. It's between maybe being a parent, being a teacher, another short story anthology call coming up, and then I kind of get distracted and I don't go back. But this new one, we'll see. It feels pretty good. It seems to be my white whale, the novel, the longer work. I can write it, but then to shape it into something good. Maybe my expectations are quite high too. I don't want to put out a novel in the world that's mediocre. I want to put out something that I feel is at least solid, good. So, but this one again deals with, kind of child death and disappearance. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm working through some stuff. Who knows? My parents divorced when I was young. I mean, my father died when I was 20. So, but yeah, I guess these are. I'll give a fuller answer to my psychoanalyst if I ever have one.
Yeah, yeah. I definitely agree. I think that a trigger warning, I mean, it is nice to do, but number one, it's horror. If you're reading horror and you have issues with like the gore, the death, you're kind of missing the point of the genre. Secondly, I don't want the spoiler. I want to be surprised and shocked and terrified. Not, oh, well, I totally saw it coming because it was right there on the cover of the book.
That's my feeling. I mean, that's exactly how I feel. And I mean, I was very respectful about this review. I thought it was great, and I don't mind some criticism. So on, I thought, yeah, this is something to think about. Maybe there should have been one in there. I don't know. And then I think on somewhere on social media, but not where I knew. We're on Facebook. I issued one which was sincere, though it sounded a little bit wise ass. And I said that, yeah, it's true. A slew of people die in this. A number of them are kids, one horse, and a squirrel. So,
Not the
which,
squirrel, you monster.
yeah, man, yeah. It's the first story. There's squirrel death. There's squirrel death in this piece. So, but where I spent most of my life in Wisconsin, those fuckers are ubiquitous. There's no
Seriously.
there's no shortage of squirrels.
We have a squirrel that is actually kind of nibbling on our front porch. So I might actually appreciate that story. Like, yeah, fuck that squirrel.
Yeah, maybe it's going to be cathartic for you. So you'd be like,
Exactly.
yeah.
Or it gives me
Yeah,
ideas.
he's a very minor character. Yeah, he has no lines. You don't have too much time to get attached to him. But
Well,
yeah,
that
he dies. He dies strangely.
there we go. All right. Now, for all the work that was previously published, did you do any kind of edits or updates before this collection was put out?
Not much because honestly, I'm a compulsive reviser. It took me, and I think this is one of the lessons that sort of separates the wheat from the chaff in the writers. And I'm hoping I'm the chaff. Sometimes I am, and that is realizing that a story has to go through, most stories, not all, but usually a story has to go through 10, 12, 15 revisions. I mean, I think 3, 4 of these stories have been published in the dark, with Sean Wallace and Sylvia Morena Garcia when she was there. So they've been ruthlessly revised. The only thing was, I mean, I did read back through for sure, and amazingly, there were a few gaffes, a few errors in there too, which shocked me after all the time I've been through them. And then the editor, it's amazing what will sort of elude the editorial eye. I think my final editorial process was sending the finished manuscript after Cemetery Gates Media was just about ready to pull the trigger with it, and I said let me send it to my brother who's a translator who lives in Greenland, and he's just a super annoying, pedantic grammarian. So he went through with his fine tooth comb, and but he caught a few things, and there was a number of other things where he's not a writer. So there's some things where he's like, the syntax of the sentence is odd. And I said, yeah, man, it's literary. It reads better this way. But honestly, for me, part of the pleasure of publishing is not just knowing that I'm going to communicate it to the world, that ideally people who, not just people I know, but people I don't know are going to read this and hopefully dig it, is that I'm done with it. I never have to revise this story again, because you can just work it and work it and work it. I mean, I've had different stories too, not ones in this collection, that I think I've worked to death. I've embalmed them essentially. They read perfect, but they're kind of, they're almost lifeless in a way.
Mm-hmm.
So
Nice. All right, let's talk covers, because for me, a cover of a book is a make or break thing. I know what they say, don't judge a book by its cover, but you do. And the cover you have is really cool. It's this like pharmaceutical kind of theme here. Who's the artist behind it, and how did you guys get together?
yeah, sure. Well, this is Matthew Rever. I always thought it was Matthew Revert, but I think I was listening to a podcast recently. Who was it? I think it was Philip Fracassi. He has this podcast, The Dark Word. I'm sure you probably heard it. It's been around for a while, so it's great. I mean, and he mentioned the name. So anyway, Matthew Revert. He's Australian, and I've been a huge fan of his work. I mean, he's done amazing stuff. I highly encourage people to check out just his website if you haven't. Uh, he's been doing indie horror and indie books for quite a while now, and a whole variety of other kind of weird album art and whatnot. So I completely agree. I mean, the old adage of you don't judge a book by its cover. It's a great one when it comes to people, but it ain't true for books anymore. Period. I mean, I think it's crucial. It's vital. And for my first book, I was very lucky because this was a tiny publisher. I mean, they're defunct now, and they started off, but it's interesting. They had great connections. They were publishing Evanson. The person who selected my novella was Stephen Grant Jones. He was not a big name yet, but they had one issue completely devoted to him, where he's writing in several different genres, including a graphic novel. And then the person who judged the next contest was Paul Tremblay. So they were kind of prescient in some ways about these things. Anyway, the one who designed that cover, I was friends with a professional book cover designer. So that one was great. With this one, I knew I wanted a Rever cover. And originally, when the story collection was accepted, it was actually accepted at Off Limits with Samantha Kolsnick. And I'm sure you know her, marvelous writer, amazing to work with. And I said, look, I'll pay for it if you want. It's indie, I know. And she said, no. I'm never going to have an author pay for the cover. So I contacted Matthew. His schedule was clear. It was my idea. He liked it a lot. He did an iteration of it, which honestly, I mean, I don't know. I'm just a picky motherfucker. I said, look, man, I I really want this bottle on the cover to have this sense of kind of materiality, to really feel like a picture of an actual bottle, not just to be a sort of flat two-dimensional representation. And to his credit, he worked with me over the course of, on and off for the course of maybe 6 weeks. And at the end of the whole process, I said, so am I the most anal person you've ever worked with? And he said, well, he said, you're not the most anal. He said, but you're a really nice guy. And I liked the project. So, I mean, it was an interesting process. And part of it too, when I was thinking about it, is that it's very different coming up with a cover for a collection of short stories versus a novel, because a novel is really of a piece. It's about one thing, right? Okay, it's about many things, but it encompasses a single story, albeit long. And with this one, I thought, well, damn, I mean, what is a cover that kind of captures all these stories? So you have to think, of course, what's your title story, which I had submitted it as. So I thought, okay, I'm kind of locked in with this effects fairy. It's an interesting, unusual title. And then I thought, okay, well, yeah, medicine bottle and the labels and so on. And yeah, I mean, Rever, he dug the idea right away. He got it. And yeah, that's how it came out. I'm super happy with it, honestly. I mean, that feeling, we were talking a little before the podcast, holding your book in your hands. And yeah, and it's an unusual cover. It's interesting when I see it. Some reviewers, I've sent it out, they'll do this kind of what do they call it, like a book haul, where they have a bunch of books that they have that have come in that they're going to read and review eventually. And I see it side by side with the other covers, and it pops. And it's, what I did not want is, I didn't want this kind of the skulls and the kind of all the cliche shit that we see. And honestly, I've seen horror covers that, for good books, that just don't work for me. I don't want to mention them by name, but yeah, it's very strange to me. I mean, obviously, it's an incredibly subjective choice, but there are some that just feel either cliche, over the top, or just aesthetically they don't move me, and it's so crucial. And there's so many good cover artists now. This Matthew Rever. I mean, I don't know if you know Don Noble, who's done a lot of stuff. He did Haley Piper's, Queen of Teeth. He's done a lot of other covers. He's fantastic. I mean, he would have been my second choice, I think. But yeah, it's a thanks. I think it's a strong cover, and it encompasses the book nicely.
Definitely. All right. We are coming to the close here, folks. But of course, we're going to ask the big question, the one that you're all probably wondering: what's next?
Okay. Well, good question. No, I mean, I have a few stories which are hopefully coming out in the next year, and then it's hopefully this big work, which I mean, the working title is The Healing, but we'll see. I'm not entirely happy with it, but we'll see. Titles often I'll change, 2, 3, 4 times, and it's a kind of a gothic novel. And I would say, when it comes to there's so many subgenres of horror, but it's a work of kind of grief horror, because it's about a mother whose son has disappeared. So as a parent, and maybe that's honestly where some of this kind of fixation on the child stuff in my stories comes from, is I have 2 daughters. Now I'm a grandfather too. I have a grandchild who's adorable. And, when you're a parent, this is the worst case. Anything happen to your child, you're destroyed. So this is basically the start of the book, is that this child has been gone for a year, and she's sort of postponed it and been, uh, going through all the channels to find them. And there's a service which is held. This is the opening of the book, and she has a total meltdown. And it's from there, it's the story of what has happened to the child, and at the same time her kind of healing through this very dark sort of network of what happens to these children. Uh, this is what I've been working on. So we'll see. We'll see when it's done. I mean, I've written a kind of a rough draft. I think this is one that I'm gonna stick with and see through to the end and hopefully publish. So that's what's next up for me.
Well, Michael, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. This has been a lot of fun. And folks at home, you know what to do. It's Michael Harris Cohen, COHEN.net. You'll find everything there. Follow his socials. Leave reviews. I'll keep saying it because it's very important. All this interaction is what's required for these authors to just get better and rise up and become more well-known.
Absolutely. Thank you, Max. Yeah, I appreciate it. It's so true, especially for us indie authors. Every review helps. Yeah, and doing this kind of thing. I've enjoyed this, Max. It's been great talking to you.
Hey guys, what's going on? This is Brian Murphy from One Time Mountain, and you're listening to Citywide Blackout with Max Bowen.
Rock on.
And that brings this episode to a close. You can follow the show on Facebook under Citywide Blackout and Twitter and Instagram under Citywide Max. Get at me at citywidemax@yahoo.com and check this show out wherever you find your favorite podcast, as well as every Saturday at 10 p.m. on Boston Free Radio. That's all for now, and I'll see you next time.